Thanks, sir. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Go ahead and call the Finance and Planning Committee meeting to order. A little bit of official business. Official recordings, videos, or transcriptions of HSV Property Owners Association committee meetings and/or board meetings will be done by authorized personnel only and can be viewed on the HSV Property Owner Association YouTube channel and explorethevillage.com. Any other recording, video, or transcription of the meeting is not considered the official record of the meeting. Next item on the agenda was review and approval of the previous minutes. So a little conversation about action item that Jeff had, we modified slightly. Other than that, I didn't notice anything else that needs to be corrected. But
well, Tom corrected the minutes from the October 21st meeting to the October 25th, which is a fat finger.
Okay.
And then Jeff's paragraph under action items will now read, Jeff to initiate a list of areas where data behind fees would be helpful for the 22 budget process. So, and I was going to send him out this morning and I cleaned instead, so my apologies.
That's all right. That's all right. Any other comments, adjustments to the minutes? In that case, I guess we'd move to go ahead and approve both sets of minutes as they currently are documented, or did Tom correct the October 22 minutes after the fact? And we already have them published.
No, in the November 8 minutes, I said we approved the October 21st.
And
22nd. It should have been the 25th.
Okay, my bad, my bad.
No, my bad, but.
Motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? No. Motion carries. Only had two items on the agenda this week. One of them is, I believe Karina's briefing the board shortly regarding the enterprise fleet management activity that we've gotten to participate in the last couple of weeks. We need to come up with some kind of a communication to the board, I believe in support of the leasing proposal. I did email Karina late last week and asked her whether, what format she essentially wanted that information in. Apparently, Dallas is working on a report to the board as well. So what we kind of settled on is we'll go ahead and sort of take that information and boil it into a PowerPoint slide or two. That way we'll have a report and a somewhat more different format for people to read. So depending on how people process information, hopefully they'll gather the right data from one piece of information or another. Then the other item, and I took a very, very, very rough cut the other day at a draft of the capital funds policy. I spent a little bit of time working on that. Did not know if there was anything else for the agenda this week or not, though.
The only thing I guess would be is just to clarify the remaining dates in the calendar year for our meeting.
I think that's a good point. That's a very good point.
And Larry, did you ever get Karina was gonna send us the budget calendar, and we also talked about the calendar for the board, so we could kind of start thinking about our review process.
Did not get any feedback on either one of those, so
Okay.
probably need to reach out.
So do you need a motion to approve the agenda? If so, I move we approve the agenda.
Okay.
Second.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Notes to self here. So I sent out an email late last week based on, I took a very rough cut at some of the data points. Got feedback from different folks. So I apologize for the somewhat kaleidoscopic color file that came back out, but it was easier that way to kind of boil everybody's thoughts together. So I'm just kind of working.
Can I ask two questions on it?
Go for it.
Our purpose of doing this is so that we will have access to the vehicles we need. Do we have any assurance that we will still be able to get the vehicles? We know that some of them we can't get.
I don't think there's an explicit assurance, but from what I understand from the enterprise folks, if we get orders in advance of when their particular vehicles close out, based on what the manufacturers are telling them, the probability of us having those vehicles goes up significantly.
So no guarantee, but significantly increase the probability of being able to get what we need when we need it.
Exactly. Because I believe what we're really doing is leveraging their purchasing power. Since they're buying something on the order of 1 million vehicles next year from various suppliers, they're probably the single largest order from most of these companies. So I would think that would be a pretty high priority item for the automotive manufacturer to service.
I think we all understand that. I just want to be clear with the board that they understand it also, that the membership understand it also.
Mhm.
My second question on this is, we are going to lease a bunch of workhorses and not show horses. Do we know where we stand on these vehicles, this usage, at the 15,000 miles a year?
Probably more of a Dallas question, but my understanding was that we're not putting 15,000 a year on these vehicles on average.
That's my understanding too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there may be some vehicles that are probably a little more, I'll use the phrase risky for lack of a better description. I think the police cars are probably the ones that have the most miles on them because they're out on the road, most of the time. But the trucks that are being used by our people to service their day-to-day jobs are typically not out on the road 7,500 miles a day. They're going to go from the yard to whatever the work site is and then back, or work site to work site, depending on what's on their schedule. But from my understanding from Dallas, their 15,000 mile criteria really wasn't a risk item for them. There may be a couple of cases where they'll have to manage them a little more actively to make sure they keep the vehicles rotated and keep cars on the road and make sure they don't have one with 25,000 miles and one with 5,000 miles. But I think that's something they can probably manage.
I'm just bringing it up as a caveat to the board, so that they are aware of these things and they don't hit the end of the road and say, oh my gosh, you told me we're only going to have 15,000 miles, we're going to be able to get this kind of payback. So it's not really amongst ourselves, because I think we thought this through, but
Yeah.
I kind of carried to the board.
Yep. And I have to admit, I don't know exactly the format of and the content of what Dallas is working on. So we may get into a situation where I guess we're better off to tell folks the same thing twice rather than not tell them at all. So we probably need to make sure that we address those items as part of our recommendations. It's a good point.
Well, my concern was just to point out somewhere in the recommendations that even though we'll be paying a little less upfront in acquiring these vehicles, they're only for 2 years, and we normally hang on to vehicles much longer than that. So there will be at the end of 2 years, we're going to need some of that money. So to either buy it or replace it with a new lease, and just to make sure that that's put into whatever fund it needs to be put into rather than spent in other areas, if that makes.
To piggyback on what you're saying, I think it really needs to be pointed out, because I had to have it pointed out to me. It's cheaper to replace them in 2 years than it would be if we were to hang on to them. And we're doing this, the 2-year thing, not because we want to keep brand-new, pretty vehicles, but the 2-year is a financial decision which saves money compared to keeping vehicles for the 7 years or 10 years. And to me, that was kind of counterproductive in my first thought, because that's not the way I approached it for my cars. And so I think that's really important, that we're not just trying to have pretty cars. We're trying to save money, and the way to do that is to have newer cars.
Is that what Enterprise is telling us, or did we actually sit down and go through the numbers?
Enterprise,
Enough said.
We had a pretty good set of data from Enterprise, and we asked them some questions, and they were pretty straightforward about their responses. You know, one of the things that we were concerned about was whether or not they were using current Black Book prices on vehicles versus history. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was the numbers they were giving us were historical Black Book prices, not current Black Book prices.
Correct.
Thought that was what I heard.
Yep.
And so, if anything, if the chip shortage doesn't get sorted out in the next couple of years, when those vehicles come up for renewal, they'll probably do better in the aftermarket than what Enterprise is quoting us. Yeah, I think it is not a intuitively obvious acquisition decision. Because I'm kind of like Becky. My first thought, you know, from a personal standpoint, my thought toward vehicles is, you know, I'm a buy and hold vehicle kind of person. But I also recognize that the duty cycle on my vehicles is a whole lot different than the duty cycle on these vehicles. And so you know, being able to find a sweet spot and being able to pick up the buying power that comes from the volume of purchases that they're making, I think is what really makes the big difference between my making a decision to buy or lease a car and the POA making a buy lease decision. You know, because I'm not getting cars at anywhere near the cost that the POA is going to pay through some of these national procurements.
So the specific slide that Enterprise presented to us on this had to do with the comparison of costs for depreciation, fuel, and maintenance. And 2 years was not the number. They just said some are 2 years. They said they evaluate each vehicle based on market and everything else on what that crossover point is when fuel, maintenance, and depreciation cross in their time horizon. And right now, today, with today's prices, it crosses at about 2 to 3 years. But that doesn't mean that it might not cross at a later point in future years. But their point is that there is a point when fuel and maintenance costs start to cross. And if you wait and hold on to your vehicle past that point, you're actually losing money on the deal. And they're trying to say, hey, you should be evaluating every time those points come up on whether or not you want to keep your vehicle or you want to go for a new vehicle.
they broke it down, dollars per month. You know,
Yeah.
if you do it, buy that sweet spot, you save hundreds of dollars per month as compared to waiting, I think they used 10 years, 7 years.
Yeah.
But, I mean, broke it down in a nice chart for us.
So I think it at least is something for us to have in our hip pocket as we go forward. But I think we have a good fleet manager who will look at that carefully with Enterprise and make the best decision on what is the best dollar cost average for us in the long run.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. My concern, and I expressed it to Larry a few weeks back, was that the appearance that we're just trading in cars every 2 years, and what's the community going to think?
Yeah.
And as long as it's easily explainable, and it can show that that it is truly saving cash, I think we may be
I think you
okay.
can show the cost savings easily explainable might be the interesting part, you know.
Everybody's gonna
but
have their own
Well,
opinion.
they're gonna have their own opinions, but
Yeah.
we're gonna have some kind of data
Yeah.
behind that analysis to be able to present to the board and to ourselves and to the community, so we all understand what we're doing with our.
Well, and from a simple person's perspective, to me, that question was somewhat answered, or might satisfy minds like my own, that we have at the end of the 2-year or 3-year lease, whatever it ends up being, we have the option to buy it ourselves at whatever residual there is. And there may be some that we don't use as much, and I know that'd be worth a little more, but to me, that's like, this is more than likely fair.
Yeah.
Again, it's simplistic, but
And I think that it's even more flexible than that. You can extend the lease, you can buy the vehicle, you can turn the vehicle back in per the original expected timeline, or you can turn the vehicle back in early. You know, so it really appears that there's maximum flexibility for the POA. You know, there's obviously different costs at different points in time that go along with that. But it seems like there's a ton of flexibility in their procurement program. There is not even a long-term commitment associated with vehicle leasing. You know, you sign the master lease agreement, that establishes the broad parameters, and then every vehicle is its own individual lease contract. And we have the ability when a vehicle comes to us, or when Enterprise notifies us that they have a vehicle inbound to us, we have the opportunity to change our mind at the last minute and say, no, we changed our mind, we're going to go a different way. So it seems like it's an extraordinarily flexible arrangement. And it seems like it has some really significant near-term advantages to us, the biggest one being the probability of actually being able to get vehicles, which is pretty low right now. I mean, the state contracts and some of the other agreements that we've been relying on for a number of years, there's no promises coming from those entities at this point regarding vehicles. Again, they're buying maybe a couple of hundred vehicles versus a couple of 100,000 vehicles, you know, so they're pretty far down the service queue from the manufacturers. Couple that with the opportunity to reduce our upfront cost and reduce it, at the end of the day, it's really how much are we paying per month, you know, to be able to maintain those vehicles. And it seems like with the rather extensive database that Enterprise has and the support of I'm not sure exactly what that person is called, customer service representative or whatever that point of contact is that's going to work with Dallas. Every 3 to 6 months, we're going to get an update on all the vehicles we have and recommendations from them on what the right thing to do with those vehicles is. And they don't appear to have any particular bias to any particular solution. They seem to be able to work with the data that's available and let their clients decide how to manage their vehicles.
It appears to me to also make it an easier budgeting process. Less variables, more fixed, which makes it a little bit easier to handle a budget from today to tomorrow to the year after next.
Yeah, I was thinking it should result in a much smoother cash flow, you know, because you'll know what your commitments are for those vehicles, how long the lease term is out. You know, you'll know what those commitments are. You'll be able to shape your cash flow around your other needs as you go forward.
I would put what you just said, slightly condensed, into the whole recommendation. I thought it was excellent. Lists all the advantages and everything else.
I didn't make a note of the answer when, did we ask Dallas if he had done a contact with 2 or 3 other companies? I don't recall what his answer was.
He was given 2 or 3 references of folks relatively locally who use Enterprise, a couple of police departments and one municipality, if I remember right.
But any other vendors?
He had, other vendors out there?
Yeah. I know when you go online, you can get a long list of people who claim to be in the fleet management business, but I don't remember what he said. I know the big truck answer was there aren't any,
Yeah.
but I didn't make a note of the rest of
I
it.
don't know that they've explored other vendors. I think that's really the bottom line. I think when they looked at the enterprise information, when they looked at their size and they looked at the degree of flexibility they provided, I think and I'm putting words into Dallas's mouth, so it's a dangerous thing to do. But
Yeah.
I believe his evaluation at that point was there really wasn't a need to explore with other vendors, since we essentially were dealing with the largest supplier out
Yeah,
there.
the way it was in history.
I do know he had gotten references at request, he'd gotten relatively local references from people. He had reached out to them, but when he was last here, he had not heard back from any of those points of contact. So I don't know if he's had any feedback from them, and, they have any data they can share about their experiences over time with Enterprise.
Gary, I don't know.
You mentioned budget. I do not have details from staff, but the target date for budget is October this year. For the 2023 budget, discussion session is October 5, and the regular meeting is October 19.
Okay.
And that's when the board is projecting to approve the budget.
Okay. That's good to know. But it would be good. Do you have access to the 2022-23 board calendar yet, Gary? Is it out publicly?
Yes, and I will forward that.
I would appreciate that if
I
you
will.
would.
I
But
promised to do that earlier, well, the meeting was last week, so
Yeah, that's all right.
we've had a few setbacks since then.
Okay.
Hey, Gary, back to your other question, I don't know whether it came from Enterprise or it came from within, but it was brought up that Enterprise was the one we're looking at because they are the largest, and therefore they've got the best selection and best able to meet our options because of their sheer size compared to the other people who are players in the game. I can't tell you where I got that from, but
No, that was brief, that was what they said.
Can make a difference. You don't want to be talked into something with the company can't produce, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
best to do with the history.
Yeah. Yeah, if you sign up with Joe's Fleet Rental and your customer number is a single digit, you might have made a mistake. So I think the other part of what was written up for good or ill was, to be fair, there were some, I call them disadvantages. I'm not sure if that's exactly the right phrase, but one of them has already been brought up, and that there is a mileage limit and a vehicle condition limit associated with the vehicles that we would lease from Enterprise. So if we overrun the miles and/or we beat the heck out of the vehicle, that's going to have an impact on its resale value. And it really would come right straight back to the POA. Abusing the vehicle would have a direct result of that vehicle not selling for the price that we would hope it would sell for, and it would end up potentially costing the POA more money than it should. The other thing that's there that needs to be factored into that cost is there are some insurance coverage limitations associated with the contract. I don't know how those coverage limitations compare cost-wise to what we currently carry on vehicles. I understand if the vehicle's more than 5 years old, we carry basic liability and that's it. There's different insurance requirements for these newer vehicles. That probably has a cost impact associated with it, but I'm not sure. Because if we went out and traded in old vehicles and bought new vehicles, we would insure them much closer to what Enterprise is requesting than what we're carrying the old vehicles at anyway. But it is a cost factor in the
I have a quick question. Probably doesn't really matter as far as the decision. But Ford, you might be able to help me understand this. With new lease accounting rules, does it have any impact from your perspective to our balance sheet here?
So I haven't really studied the new rule and how it would apply and when it would apply to the
Yeah.
POA.
Yeah.
But my understanding is for virtually all leases, a business will have to record a right of use asset and depreciate that asset and a lease liability for the amount of the lease, which is very similar to what we would call a capital lease
Right.
in today's world.
Right.
But that accounting, from my understanding, will apply to virtually all leases, even if they are what we used to call an operating lease. So the financial accounting for it will be similar to a capital lease. And I don't think the factors that the enterprise people were sharing, that it used to be, you had a list of factors, and if you hit 3 out of 5, it was this, and 2 out of 5, it was that. And I think a lot of that has gone away under this new leasing standard. Having said that, none of this affects cash flow.
Right.
Right? I mean, it's all
Yeah.
debits and credits on the books, but not cash flow. But it does affect the appearance of the financial
Right.
statements in that it keeps companies from keeping liabilities off the balance sheet. And that was the intent, I think, of the FASB when they put this rule in, because people with operating leases, because they didn't want to put that as a debt on their books. And so the rule has changed to make more people have to record that to show what they think is the true financial picture.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, but it doesn't really, it's not really going to impact the administration of the accounting for all these leases. Just that,
I just,
probably
it may
not,
be
but-
different, but it shouldn't be hard.
Okay.
Sounds like it might make us a little bit more work to set it up initially.
Yeah.
Make sure we're following the rules properly, and then after that, it becomes
Right.
relatively mechanical from the sound of it.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, and they keep pushing that rule out. Don't, have they,
They have delayed it
Yeah,
a
delayed
number
it.
of times, and that's why I say I haven't really looked
Right.
into it to see what the effective date for the POA would be. So, but at some point it'll come.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't think we should let that financial accounting impact whether this is a recommendation or not. If that
may
makes
just
any
come
difference.
down to, does it, if you have liabilities on the balance sheet, does it impact any covenants or anything like that?
You'd have to make sure it's not going to cause you to have any problems with covenants or, you know, things you may have promised people about your financial statements.
Ratios.
Yeah. Well, there's a debt ratio, but we're well under the debt ratio. There is the statement of shareholder equity. I'm sure that would how this is treated financially would certainly have an impact on that, but I don't see it being a crushing financial impact, especially since the initial step here is really something of a toe in the water. I think they're looking at 8 or 9 vehicles next year, something along that line that they were planning on recapitalizing anyway. So the idea would
There's
be
8 on the budget
8 on the budget.
that I believe fit within the criteria of a 1-ton or less vehicle that would fall under this lease.
Yeah.
That doesn't include the fire trucks and
No.
backhoes and that
Yeah,
stuff.
we have, I know there are people out there that provide similar services for those, but I think right now, availability on that equipment is so difficult that I don't know that there's anybody out there actively marketing their services.
Yeah.
So we'd be looking at something of a toe in the water next year, initiate the leasing program with the vehicles that we were already intending to recapitalize,
Yeah.
and monitor that behavior over the execution of the year. Let the staff make a calibrated decision August, September next year, if we're doing the board brief in October, of how they want to pursue vehicle acquisitions next year of similar kind of equipment. Okay. Okay. So I was trying to remember the various descriptions.
You wanna see it? Oh, you got it.
Oh, I've
Heard it now. Yeah.
got all the color code here. I was trying to see if there's anything else we really needed to try to understand. I think we talked about most of the key items. I think the near-term action is probably need to turn this into a PowerPoint slide or two. Cycle out amongst the committee, let folks take a look at it, make sure they're comfortable with how it's put together. You know, cycle it back to Dallas and Karina, make sure it's in line with their expectations. But I think that's something we can work over the next, offline over the next couple of weeks, because I believe Karina's intending to brief this at your next working session, which I know is in early December.
I think I just saw proposed agenda. Let's see if it's on. Nope, I don't have it yet.
No problem. When's the meeting, like first week in December here, something like that?
It's December 1st.
Okay. Short fuse with Thanksgiving, okay. That definitely puts us a bit on the clock. So I would say we probably need to have PowerPoint drafted and vetted by about the 29th or the 30th then, in order to meet a 12-1 working session with the board.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of a heads up for everybody, keep an eye on your email. Check your email right before the turkey puts you to sleep. Might show up. So unless there's any other conversation on that one, I think I'll take the action to take the first cut at the PowerPoint slide, route it out to people, let everybody have a whack at it. And hopefully we'll get that hammered out the next few days, be able to support the working session on the 1st of December.
So Larry, just to confirm, so from the committee standpoint, after hearing the enterprise discussion and the information that's been provided to us and our current circumstances within the marketplace, our recommendation would be is this is a good approach. It's one that we can meter and get our, like you said, put our toe in the water to start with, and then we should evaluate it, in the late summer, fall of next year, determine if this is something we want to continue or not. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yep.
Everybody agree with that?
You said it much more eloquently than I.
Okay.
Good job.
All right. Cool. So, next topic. Undefined article. I basically took the emergency reserve fund revised article that we submitted for board consideration recently and did a fairly heavy edit on it. Went through, altered the purpose to more accurately map what we think the capital funds are, identified what I believe to be the proper definitions of the two capital funds, if not piece. Section 3, the funding process for that and the funding philosophy for that is kind of open right now. I wanted to kind of leave that to a group discussion. Section 5 was discussion about investing the capital funds. Again, that was heavily influenced by what we'd already written. Same thing for Section 6. Usage of the capital funds I'm not sure I edited anything in here other than the title. The flow seemed to make logical sense to me. But I think the big thing here is the process for establishing the reserve targets. Yeah, because that one's a little bit more interesting, because we're gonna have to rely partly on what we see in the O&M projections, and then we've also got some of what we're calling the known unknowns in the fret days. You know, some of the things that we know the investments are gonna need to be made, but we're not absolutely sure when those investments are gonna need to be made. You know, so we may have to factor some of that into the dollar values that we're gonna be looking at for laying in reserves to pay for. So I'm open to ideas on how we actually describe that in a way that average people can follow along.
So if I could just make a observation, comment to that. Is a targeted amount actually what we're looking for here? So, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding of these accounts, and I wouldn't call them reserves, I'd call them accounts. These accounts are to address our cash flow problem during the year. We start out the year with not enough cash in the bank to cut a contract of any sizable, because we haven't collected enough revenue. So our hands are tied for the first several months of the year because we don't have enough cash built up to cut a contract with somebody of any sizable amount. And therefore, that delays everything until later in the year, and that's why we tend to not be able to spend all our money, because we get caught behind. By having the board throw some money and set aside some money to put into these funds allows us now to have a set amount of money. Whatever the money is, it doesn't really matter in my opinion. We have some money now so that when we begin the year, we can actually cut a contract right at the beginning. Okay? And if the contract was for utilities, for them to do a utility project, they can contract with somebody right at the beginning of the year, get that into execution because those funds are available, and then as the year goes on, I would envision we budgeted money for that activity, so that money would fill that coffer back up on the back end, but allow us to execute when we need to. So we use these capital funds, get the contract in place. The money was gonna be accumulated over the year anyway, it would go back in there. By the end of the year, the fund is whole, but the project got done in a more timely and efficient manner than it would be under our current model, which is wait, hope that at that point in time, the contractors aren't all tied up and can accommodate us. Instead, we can be more proactive and get work done. Whether that's for utilities or for just general maintenance. And then the only other thing would be is if then there were carryover funds from one year to the next, and stuff happens, right? You know, something falls through, whatever. Any carryover funds, to me, would immediately go into those capital funds, maybe making them even more money, so we can go, again, fund early, get going, get things done, show the community we're actually taking, measures, we're taking action, and then backfill those funds based on the budget amounts that were already allocated for those things. So in essence, really, your funds total will fluctuate over time because there will be some carryover at the end of the year that will plus these things up, but allows us to execute quicker on the back end. That was my understanding of what these were set up to do, to allow Karina not to have to pull her hair out all the time trying to figure out, do we have enough money to cut this contract? I don't know, because we haven't collected this month's assessments, so I don't know what we're gonna have, so that's delay a month, and that kind of activity has constantly created larger and larger carryovers each year because we're afraid of the end of the year budget closeout. Anyway,
So to piggyback on that, what I'm kind of hearing, and maybe I'm not hearing it right, but mechanically, it's almost like you look at the 2022 O&M table, and you take some or all of that and say, we're gonna put that in these capital accounts. And then throughout the year, then you take a look at the 2023 O&M table, and that's what you're building up additional funds for throughout the year, so that by the end of the year, in theory, you have funded all of 2022 O&M, and you're set for 2023.
except for I don't think we'll have a full amount of money in there to cover all of
Right.
2023's budget. These are the items at the beginning of the year where we want to get started early and we don't want to have to wait till the end of the year type of thing that helps us with that transition period from budget to budget.
Yeah, you'd have to look at it to determine what amounts are appropriate, but you're taking some or part of it.
Part of the forecast for the next year, yes. I would say that that's a reasonable perception to have looking at the budget layout. Of course, the staff would have to tell us what items
Right.
in that budget do they want to get started right away, or what items are they going to do.
Right.
The whole intent, right, is not to delay the engagement with, if it's a contractor, or engagement with, materials or parts or getting things on order or whatever that have to be done, because that just exacerbates the problem, right? Pushes things later and later, and stuff starts to stack up, and then there's just not a physical enough time, people, resources to be able to get it done, because you haven't scheduled it through the year.
So,
I have to
just
admit-
just kind of as a reminder, I'm trying to get my head around some numbers. With the assessment increase, what is the capital expenditure budget for '22? Big round numbers. Anybody remember that big round?
8 million?
8 million,
I
something
think it's a
like
I
little,
have it right here,
I
so
think
I'll-
it's a little over 8 now.
It might be 10.
Yeah, I
have
think
it
we
right
were,
here.
I think we were almost 8 million in '22 in the baseline budget, and a lot of that had to do with rollover funds being applied in '23. And it went up, the additional revenue from the assessment increase was on the order of $1.7 million.
So,
Pretty good
right
chunk
about
of that
10
was,
million.
pretty good chunk of that was to hire people and get some equipment, basically put another street crew in place. But there were some additional capital expenditures there as well. Might be 8.5, 8.6 now instead of 8, but I don't remember.
I'll find it in just a second.
Okay.
And then I guess my other question was, do we know what Corina is projecting our cash available for projects will be at the end of this year? Because aren't we carrying a rather large cash balance into next year? So we essentially have, I think my point I'm trying to get my head around is I think we essentially already have the accounts we're trying to establish here. We already have the money for those accounts with the cash balance that we'd be carrying into next year.
With the carryovers.
So this policy then is basically explaining how you replenish that money for '23, which is, I think, what Jeff was describing, right?
Yeah.
So really, it's a matter of setting the target. I guess the target needs to be some percentage of the next year's capital expenditure projection.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that's 25% of the next year or 30% of the next year.
Yeah. Well, let me,
9.4 million.
9.4.
9,462,996 is the projected V2 budget capital expenditure.
Does it show how much of that is utility in general? Just,
It's on here, but I would have to do some math, I'm sorry.
no, that's
Not easy.
way beyond what I could do, so.
Well, so this may muddy the water a little bit, but I honestly hadn't thought about Jeff's approach for using it to basically early start capital projects in the year instead of waiting until the cash flow arrived. But I was also looking at it more of a mid to long-term kind of an account as well. You know, and the example I'll use is the water tanks that we know we're gonna have to do at some point in time. We're not exactly sure where, but we know somewhere roughly 25-ish plus or minus a year, we're probably gonna have to make an investment. So not only, I think, would we be using these accounts to get that jump start on next calendar year's contracting, but we've also probably got a midterm, you know, what I guess I classify as a midterm, 3, 4, 5 year out kind of a prospect to say, we expect that we're gonna have to make some capital outlays that aren't necessarily in the O&M table today. You know, because we can't nail down exactly when they're going to occur, but we know these kind of expenditures are going to happen. And start to lay some money in against those as well to make sure that when it comes 25 and we need tanks, you know, we've got the assets in place to be able to do it without there being a you know, giant, oh my God moment on anybody's part.
Would that be better suited for a specific reserve for something like that? Rather than setting these capital funds aside, keep it separate from this? Because I thought from the beginning of this conversation was that this account was more or less to help them guide or to show that they have enough cash to spend or how much cash they have left to spend for the rest of the year.
Yeah, because this is what we had been talking about in some past meetings as working capital management,
Yes,
right?
working capital.
So if we're talking about working capital, then I think what Jeff described is sort of what I was thinking this would be for. And I don't disagree with what Larry's saying, but to me, it seems like they're a little bit different.
Well, I guess the way I would bridge into what Larry's talking about goes to the OM tables. You know, at some point, we need the public utilities people to tell us when they need to do the water tanks, right? And when they do, they need to factor that into the OM tables. So to your point, there should be a look ahead going, okay, we got these expenditures coming up, you know, these working capital funds are gonna have to be able to at least address that or fund that or however that's gonna be played out. So looking forward to, you know, water tanks as our example that we're working through, that's not next year, and it's probably not the year after that, but we know that it's 2 to 3 years down. So as we're looking at OMT tables for the next 7 years, we should be starting to go, where's that gonna fit in? How's it gonna be accounted for? And as we work our way there with the working capital funds, we know that when we get to that point, there's gonna need to be about that amount of money in there.
Yeah.
Or we're gonna end up either turning to reserves or go to a loan or, you know, other means, but I'm saying that that's kind of a way I was thinking that this would roll forward.
So the funding for this would be a combination of what we need to have available to get started on projects for the following year, plus a component which is kind of building for those things that are not in the table that we know are gonna pop into the table at some point.
Well, and I like Jeff's idea of, and I agree with him that we know some of those things are out there and we can't quite nail them down now. But we'll have a pretty good idea. We get another year or so's data underneath our belt and we get new construction history on the east side of the village. We'll have a much better picture of when we probably need to make those water tank investments. But the point being, those things eventually need to show up in the O&M table in an out year. But I think the thing, and I don't know how to structure this, But I think the thing that we need to make really clear when we construct this is that if you're going to need a significant amount of money 2, 3, 4 years out, you need to start building it into your budget 2 or 3 or 4 years out. You know, you can't walk a $5 million item into the budget for next year. You know, I mean, if it's well and truly, if it's well and truly a case that something has heartbroken, or you've had some highly unusual event, you know, okay, that's what the emergency funds are for. You know, but part of the overall planning cycle is making sure that, you know, you're looking accurately out 3 to 4 years, and maybe further than that if you're looking at a multi-million-dollar investment in something, you know, to make sure that you know where that is, you've got as good a sight picture of that as you can, and that goes into the budgeting process far enough in advance that we actually have a fighting chance to be able to lay in reserves to go deal with it.
Does that then fit in with what Carl was saying about almost a separate line item that you are tracking, you're putting into it each year, but you're tracking, this is the money for this future thing, and next year you put more money into that account or line item or whatever, this is the money for that item. And so it's kept somewhat separately, so it doesn't get mixed in with everything else.
You could.
It protects you.
You could. Well, you could certainly
that
have
where
a
you're
line
going,
for,
Carl?
you can certainly have a line for working capital, and you could have a line for any kind of, I don't know what you want to call them. Special projects isn't exactly the right title, but, you know, some kind of purpose activity, you know, like a water tank or a road improvement project or something like that.
I love the known unknowns, and it seems to me we might want 2 working capital funds. I think like a bookkeeper, but 2 working capital funds and possibly another future known unknowns.
Well,
And
I
call
guess
it a
my
reserve,
only
not a
counter
fund.
to that would be is, for the known unknowns, water tanks, we know we're gonna have to do it. It's, the exact timing is not known today, but probably next year or the year after, we're gonna know when. And at that point, we need to put it into the OMT. And when we put it into the OMT, we need to make sure that it's gonna work. Not put aside money. It's gonna work in the budget, which means something's gonna get shifted around. We're gonna have to move things around. Something gets delayed a year, whatever the case may be. But the idea of, oh, we're gonna start saving money up for that in advance isn't doing the planning of what the OMTs are supposed to help us do, is that if we know we've got a $2.5 million water tank project out there in '24, then that's gonna be totaled up, and there's only so much we can spend each year on capital, so when it has to happen, then that gets in there, and something else is gonna get pushed out to the next year, or pulled forward, or whatever, and we start working that plan early, and then we don't have to have a separate account where people will consider that a slush fund, or whatever the case may be. I don't think that that's a good optic for,
If it's not defined.
because it's not defined.
Yeah.
Instead, I'd rather say, no, we're planning for it, we know it's coming. We're gonna adjust the budget each, over these next 3 or 4 years, and we're gonna make sure that we're gonna have that, we know how much money we should have available for capital projects each year. So if that's 2.5, that cuts 2.5 out, we can only have so much, and then that has to be adjusted in the out years or whatever. And that way we know that, and then the working capital funds just ensure that we can execute.
So does part of this kind of, I don't want to take us off in a totally different direction, but does part of this kind of come back to the last meeting we were talking about trying to come up with a forward-looking plan, like we're the Finance and Planning Committee? So, I mean, it seems like we should be modeling out 5 to 7 years of what we think assessments are gonna look like, and the capital projects are gonna look like, and all of that, and making sure that those numbers all continue to work. Like, roll that plan forward every year, making sure those numbers look like they're gonna work. And then this truly can be a working capital fund that's set up to manage that beginning of the year cash shortage. And that sort of, if we
Yeah.
kind of take that forward-looking approach, then the concern of having something come up, you know, we've sort of planned for it. We've taken that into account in our forward-looking approach.
That's the way I've been viewing this, going forward, because it ties back to the OMT tables, the 7-year outlook, working with the staff to know what's coming down the pike, smooth flowing that across that 7 years, so we don't have big spikes in the budget, which we know as a budget, as a fixed, you know, we're not really a fixed income, but we're somewhat a fixed income organization, so you can't have spikes in the budget, you need to smooth flow stuff, we need to have a smooth flow thought process to that. That's what 7-year OMTs should help us do, and then we have a way to kind of plan for that.
Yeah. Well, and actually, as part of the FRAD-F activities, we essentially built a mechanism that could be carried forward. You know, we took the then OMT tables, we took the revenue projections based on CPI and other factors. We used some assumptions about rates of inflation for different things, did things like estimated projection for new home starts, and basically propagated all of that stuff forward through the 7-year window.
Must be how you came up with the 3 options.
Exactly.
You had to be able to model it to
Yep.
tell what
Exactly.
they are.
Yep.
I'm just suggesting we need to be carrying that forward.
Oh, I agree.
Absolutely.
And in an intentional way
Yeah,
to make sure it continues to work the way
yep,
it was originally thought it was going to work.
yep.
Yes.
Because we get to the end of this year, we'll know, you know, we already know, for example, what the assessment rates are gonna be for the next 3 years, you know, courtesy of the vote. We'll know, we can go in and update new home starts. We can go in and update the actual number of properties that are the improved properties that exist, things of that nature. So you can go in and refresh all of those numbers. Once the OMT table data gets updated, that information can be driven back into that same model. And then to your point, you've got the ability to go forward and say, okay, where are we 24, 25, 26, you know, looking out, and give us an idea of what we think the revenue's going to be at that point, and compare that with what the OMT tables say our expenditures are going to be.
Right.
And if we, you know, to Jeff's point, you know, we can't have the budget demand look like your EKG. You know, it's got to be relatively smooth, because, you know, we're almost a fixed income entity. You know, we're a fixed income entity plus or minus a relatively small boundary around, but we got a pretty good idea of what our revenue is going to be going forward.
Can I ask a stupid question? How do the OMT tables deal with inflation? The buying power of your dollar? Do you go back in and adjust those on a yearly basis based on the new buying powers of your dollars? I mean, you know what you're gonna get coming in for revenue, but that is a variable for what your expenses are.
Yeah.
The way it was built to support the FRAD-F activities and the assessment activities was, there were assumptions made about rates of inflation for salaries, there were assumptions made for rates of inflation for all of the overhead charge, you know, all the capital and all of the expense items. Those assumptions are actually built in as variables in the tabling. So you can change those numbers, and so if you don't like, you know, I think we were assuming a 3% wage increase. Well, clearly 3% wage increase was very conservative in '22. You know, so you can go in and change that annual rate of increase in wages over that span of time to a different number. You can go in and change the rate of inflation of various items in the OMT table to different numbers, and it'll go ahead and roll that computation out for you.
So are they done annually or semi-annually or biannually?
Well, the way we set it up the way we set it up for what we were doing on Frat F is we basically used that average assumption propagated forward for that 7-year period of time, because we didn't really have anything better.
But to your question, we can update it annually or however
Oh,
we
yeah.
really
Yeah.
want to update it.
We can, but do we?
Yeah.
But probably on an annual basis would be realistic based on our standard budgeting process.
Yeah, and it's kind of structured to be an annual update. You know, so you'd go in November, December, update the actual counts that you knew, and then you'd use whatever data you had to be able to figure out what those inflation rates are gonna be going forward, you know, based on the last year or two's history, you know. And-
Now, who does that?
Well, when we did it for Frat F, it was predominantly myself and a couple other folks doing the data analysis work. The question becomes, where does the care and feeding of that particular item reside going forward? It seems like it's something that we could potentially do. It could be a staff item.
Because I've seen those types of beautiful tools become orphans.
Yes. Yeah.
And then the other part to that is that the staff input to the OMTs, because they build them, all right, is their best estimate of what the cost of goods and equipment and everything else goes. And of course, they're doing just like we are. They're estimating what they think that's gonna inflate on in the out years, so. Those will have to be adjusted going forward to make sure that we kind of are in the same ballpark.
Yeah. Yeah. The files are currently alive and well on my desktop. So they certainly can be, it's certainly something that this body could maintain going forward. It's something that the staff could maintain going forward. Personal opinion would be, it probably becomes a good cross-check, because the staff, most of the data that's going to go into those projections is going to be data prepared by the staff. You know, it's going to be their own OMT table updates. It's going to be their outward look on things that they need to do. You know, taking that data and rolling it up and doing the compare against revenues seems like something that could fit under a planning task for finance and planning, to be able to look at it and go, okay, you're looking good. You know, you're looking good the next 2-3 years, you're looking good. You know, after that, things start to get a little out of alignment, or you look at it and go, you know, you've got a near-term problem. You probably need to factor that into your budget cycle for the next year or two, you know, based on wherever the revenue is versus wherever the expense growth is. And that seems like that combination could work out really, really well.
And kind of to go back to what we're planning to submit as a policy, it seems to me that the purpose, section 2 is good. Section 3 needs to have emergency reserves taken out and put into working capital fund or something of that nature. And rather than calling them to establish reserves, the board will from time to time designate minimum funding amounts based on, rather than basic, I don't know. And depreciation is an accounting term that I'm not fond of, because to me it's not a hard cost. But rather than making it a percentage of or a one-year estimated depreciation, might not it be a percentage of the next year's capital expectations or something like that? I'm just looking at terminology. Is that not where we're at?
I think that's where I was kind of trying to go,
Yeah.
trying to articulate is I don't think that there's necessarily a target, but there is, you know, there's the initial values that we have right now, right? Which the board put money in there to kickstart this going forward, which is a good idea. And then as we look forward into the next year's capital and what we know, then we have an idea of what that number should be, and that should be kind of the goal or the target that we should shoot for. And then that gets updated every year going forward. That's a part of the process, right? Not necessarily a policy, but the policy would articulate that that's kind of how we should go about that.
But each year we start with an amount of seed money.
We have seed money already, so
But-
that, we have that start point now. And then, of course, at the end of the year, we'll naturally have carryover, so you would think that that would fold into this
Yeah, how much do you leave as seed money and how much do you divert somewhere else?
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm not married in any way, shape, or form to any of the words on the paper that I sent out. So if you don't, nobody likes them, you're welcome to change them to what you're comfortable with. Because it was a mud on the wall opportunity here.
Hey, somebody's got to start, and good job doing so. But
So section 3 is supposed to be capital fund, not fund emergency?
Yes.
I like
Oh,
the term
good
capital
catch.
working fund
Yeah.
myself, but
I didn't say I edited it thoroughly, Gary.
Well, you know,
You got me.
it's a hit and miss for me these days, reading, so,
I missed that one. I understand what you're saying. Here, just when you think you got them all, you know how that is.
And I guess the only other thing would be is I know we call this, you know, capital funds.
you don't like funds?
Well, no, I'm not necessarily hung up on the word funds, but I like the word working. Only because it really connotates what we're doing with the funds. In other words, these are gonna be used, as Karina says, these are gonna be used. They're not gonna be held over here on the side. We're actually gonna physically expend these, replenish them, expend them, replenish them as we're going along. Maybe there's a better word, but seems to be that it would be important in the policy to convey that mindset.
Utility working funds, general working funds.
Something like that, something to
Well, I would just call I would call it working capital fund, and you have a utility working capital fund
Yeah.
and an operating working capital fund. Because
Yeah.
working capital is
that.
what we're talking about.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
And then the minimums, it seems like it would be any, just to define, any leftovers, any things that couldn't be used for the current year, plus something,
Plus the initial values.
the initial value, what's in there now.
Yeah.
Okay. But should there be some? Well, maybe not. I'm thinking a percentage of, going to what you were saying, a percentage of the next
I
year's.
thought we would set a kind of a target, a floor of a certain percentage of the
Yeah.
following year's capital budget.
Yeah,
So, you know, if you thought you wanted to get a third of the project started in the first part of the year when you wouldn't normally have the money, then maybe you set a target of 33% of the next year's expected capital spend.
So you're,
Or 25%, or whatever the number needs to be.
So the only question I have on that.
As a floor.
As a what?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but the only question I have on that is that if you look to the next year and you say it's a percentage of that next year's budget, we have a plan in the prior year to expend all those resources, right?
yeah.
And the kickstart money, then these working capital funds get things going, but they get replenished back in. So when we come around to the next year, it almost is the floor. Can't raise the floor unless something didn't go through it. There was carryover money to raise the floor. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, I see.
Otherwise now you're setting aside money in '22 for '23. But in doing so, you're reducing the amount of work we can do in '22. Is that really the message we want to be sending?
No,
or
I
do we
don't,
really-
I don't think so. Maybe the floor is the kickstart money that you put in to begin with.
Yeah. I would disagree with
It
that.
really, I don't know that it makes that much difference, because I think the idea is that we have money available to get projects started, and whether that's the original kickstart balance, or whether that's some percentage of the next year, or however you measure it, I don't think matters, as long as there's a sufficient amount of money at the beginning of the year to get projects started.
Yeah.
The funded amount now, is that, how much of that is carryover for 2021 projects, do you know?
Quite
I
a
know
bit.
that's a question I should
Quite
know, but.
Quite a bit.
Okay.
In In 21, the capital budget was on the order of $4.4 million. The
And we
capital
spent-
budget for 22 is now with the assessment increase
9.4 million.
approved is 9.4. You know, so some of that's coming from the new revenue streams that are coming in, but a good chunk of that's carryover from 2020 expenditures that didn't happen.
And still didn't happen in 2021.
Still didn't happen in 21. Some of the money that was allocated in 20 got expended in 21, but some of the money that was allocated to be expended in 21 didn't happen either.
So if 21 was 4.5, again, this is to get it in here.
Mm.
21 was 4.5 million. Have we spent year-to-date, and I know I should know these things, but I don't, but have we spent year-to-date 3 million? 2 million?
Good question, don't remember the answer.
But it
That's why
seems
the
like that-
monthly reporting is gonna be really important.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we should know that answer, and
Yeah.
it's really hard to dig that number out.
Hey, I'm just glad if you don't know it, then I can't be expected to know it, so life is good. But
Especially at this point in time in the calendar year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it seems like, but as, from a defining standpoint, it seems to me that as a minimum, we should start with what that figure is. We'll know it before the end of the year?
3.8 million was of the 22 capital budget, it should be carried over.
Okay.
3 of the 22, but this would be
3.8.
21 capital budget carryover, I think, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that 3.8 million would be,
3.8 million.
would be the
Is
carryover
carryover,
from 21 into
okay.
22.
Wow.
But by definition, it seems like the floor would be that amount,
That amount.
the unused capital for the current year, plus.
Plus the planning,
Yeah,
Yeah,
the addition,
yeah.
and that,
it's a minimum of the minimum.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
thing that makes this challenging though is kind of back to Jeff's point. If your objective is to burn as much of the money in the calendar year that you targeted to burn, you know, by the time you get to November, December, your carryover amount should be considerably smaller than.
Considerably
the
smaller
last
than it
couple of
has
years'
been
history.
in previous years,
Yeah.
because
Yeah, so.
Because we
we
should
can
be
do it.
able to execute better,
Yeah.
right,
Yes.
which is the intent of
Yeah.
having these funds available to us so that we can execute better, so at the end of the year, instead of consistently carrying over millions of dollars,
Yes.
we should be carrying over less than millions of dollars, going forward. You know, all things being equal, there's many factors that can impact that, but,
Yeah.
you know.
So
That-
from a
that's-
minimum, would it be accurate to state it as current year unfunded capital, or something like that, plus 500,000 or something like that as the seed money? I'm just trying to find something to
Yeah,
put in
I'm-
policy.
A better definition of it.
I'm struggling with both the definition and the source of the funding, you know, because the challenge becomes, even if you had a dramatically smaller amount of carryover funds, those funds carry over, but they're not exactly carried over unallocated. They're already allocated funds in all likelihood. They're probably contracts that have been let and haven't been completed by the end of the year. So, yeah, the funding's carrying over, but they're already committed. So they don't necessarily help you with that. How do you jumpstart next year's contracting actions? Because the 5th of January, you could get an invoice for most, if not all, of that,
Yes.
of that particular activity, just because of how things fall out.
So there should be some floor. Maybe it's more than 500,000, maybe it's, does it need to be flexible? What is a,
Well, I think it
Very
kind
good year.
of, it kind of goes back to where Ford was talking about. I don't know if it's a percentage, but maybe it calculates out to a percentage, because you probably need, I'm just making this up, 2 to 3 months of, you know, if you're realistically, if you're gonna early start stuff, you gotta have the ability
way
to
I
pay
was
for
thinking
it, so you
about
gotta
it
have a
was-
couple of months of funding out there.
We know what the capital budget is for 22,
Mhm.
right? And then it's just a matter of asking staff, perhaps, here's all the projects that you have in the budget for 22. How many of these are you gonna wanna get started in the first 3 or 4 months?
Yeah.
And then,
Right.
that's what the floor needs to be. so that those projects don't have to wait for the bank account to fill up.
Yeah.
We fund them starting out, and then as the year progresses, we reimburse the account with the money out of 22 for the 22 projects.
Yeah.
And then that bank account's sitting there available to start 23, and then it gets filled up later in 23 with the money for 23 projects, and so on and so forth.
And we're
Don't-
really ideally suited for that because of all the annual fees that come in before December 31st. It seems to me that that could, you know, rather than holding it in cash, saying, we need it because on an accrual basis, you know, our expenses in December, we won't have the income. Well, in November, the income won't be coming in, but we could, rather than, as Karina, I feel I've heard her describe it, everybody saying, mine, mine, mine. We put it into here as the seed money for the important things, while we've got it in December.
Don't we need to have January, the money sitting there to cover the stuff that we should have done the year before? So we've got money to take care of what we committed to the year
Yeah,
before.
absolutely.
Plus, money to take care of the things that we project should be done in January, but we don't have the money in January. For the first couple months of the year, there's some items, I'm sure, that it's to your benefit if you can start them in January. Don't you need to have the money there even if you're not getting the income in January? Which goes to your percentage.
Well, yeah, I mean, that,
Yeah.
So you need to have it to cover last year,
yeah.
plus the first couple months of the upcoming year, which could be a percentage, it could be, I don't know, projection based on what you know it would be a need that you would need to face at the beginning before you really started accumulating much of a income stream. I don't know how you do it, though.
I think that's probably gonna vary year to year.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Before we
Year to
start,
year.
depen-
Yeah.
Depending on which projects the staff wants to get started in the first couple of months of the year. There's another part of this factor, though, that just, if your head isn't hurting bad enough already, this will make your head hurt a little more. You can also play the billing timeline a little bit on the front end of the year. Okay, if you
Yeah.
put somebody under contract 1 January, they come out and deliver service, they're probably not gonna bill you until February. Then it's probably gonna be a 30 to 60 day net on their billing. So you probably don't have, even if they perform the service on the 2nd of January, the odds are pretty good that you're not gonna have to pay the bill until sometime in March. You
It's a
know,
game
so
you might not
you're,
want to play, put yourself in a position. to
well,
play
you know,
that.
if you play that game too close to the
It's
edge,
tough.
you can find yourself caught. Now, one of the other mechanisms that's available to us, courtesy of the restructuring of how the credit line is guaranteed. You know, we have $1 million credit line that is available to be able to bridge some of those kinds of activities, you know. And if you play it a little too close to the edge, you've still got, you
got
still got,
backup.
you still got a fallback. You know, you don't want to do that as a matter of course, but you've certainly got that available to you to early start some of those items or to cover a billing timing, you know, disconnect that you didn't anticipate.
So just to baseline everybody, based on what Karina sent us, so this is based on a Karina email, our working capital fund for utilities will be $666,117, plus whatever carryover we fold into that. And the general capital is 1.5 million. Plus whatever
Whatever carryover.
capital carryover happens and that is the balance, that will be the balance on December of this year.
So that's where we will be for the 23 budget.
That's what will be for the 22 budget,
22, yes, sorry.
okay? So, you know, I don't know if you call that our minimum or whatever, but that's kind of the minimum.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
And then anything that comes in as far as carryover goes adds to that, to work on 22 projects, I think.
That gives you another 3.8 million,
There could be,
could be.
right?
of rollover.
And I guess the only question I always have on carryover, is some of the carryover is truly projects that didn't get executed for whatever reason, or the bill just isn't here yet, one of the two, right? So that 3.8 probably isn't 3.8, right? It's something less. We don't know what less is, but it is something less. Then there are certain things that just didn't get executed, or maybe we made more on golf than we anticipated making on golf, and that gets carried over, right? So then some portion of that 3.8 truly could be added to working capital funds to bridge, early execution of contracts in 22. And the same thing will happen in 23, and the same thing will happen in 24, et cetera, and on and on and on. But to Ford's point, this is probably the minimum, no matter what, okay? Maybe it's actually maybe we could adjust that minimum at the beginning of 22 here, because we would truly know of the 3.8, what is actually already spoken for, and what truly could be added to those working capital funds to then give us our minimum. Because after that, every year is gonna change, but those numbers shouldn't ever change, because they should be replenished based on, we give them money to execute early, but we're gonna get that money later on in the year as the money finally comes in to replenish the working capital fund.
And I like to think that as we do this, we'll get smarter, we'll have more money up front to be able to do stuff up front.
Absolutely.
And we won't end up with this ridiculous carryover from the previous year.
That would be the ultimate. At some point, you would hope after a couple of years of doing this, you would have very little carryover into the next year, except for maybe that contract that didn't get billed until January or February. Okay, so everybody understands though that that's where that money's gonna go, and now you're in a pretty
And
good,
you give yourself enough seed money.
solvent.
You've got enough seed money
mechanism
so
to
that you're
execute.
good to start the next year.
Yep.
I missed something. The 3.8, because you said 666 and 1.5. That's
Yeah.
the carryover from undone in 20.
No, that was the amount of money that the board this year in 2021 set aside in these two accounts.
Okay,
Okay?
Those
Okay.
numbers exist today.
They are
But
in the
that
bank
totals-
account today.
but the 666 and 1.5 is between 2.1 and 2.2 million, right?
What's the 2.1 and 2.2?
Adding the 666 and the
2166.
1.5?
Okay, but they were set in two separate accounts, as I understand it.
But they still don't total 3.8. or
No,
no?
the 3.8
That's
now.
Sorry.
Okay, so that money is in the bank account right now.
It's all the
The
carryover.
projection on
In
December
the general fund
31st.
bank account? Or in the working capital fund account? Okay, what, I'm
Karina
missing
sets it-
something, I'm sorry.
Karina sets this out on page 8 through 10 of 48 in the new budget. Now, that's based on projections in hand as of September.
Yeah.
Okay,
As
so-
of September, this proposed budget was printed.
Yeah.
So, and she sets that out on, like I said, pages 8 through 10 of 48 of the new budget.
Okay.
And she itemizes those, and she uses the word utility working capital funds, just like we started a while ago,
Okay.
and general working capital funds, and she sets all of that out. Now, being a non-accountant, I have to study this a while.
Yeah.
And you guys jumps right out at you, I know, but I had to study some of this a while before I could get in the ballpark, but that's where it is.
No, and I think you hit a key phrase there though, Gary. I think that 2.16 and some change million that we just talked about is, I believe those are projected balances, not necessarily actual balances. Now, they're
Okay.
probably,
Let me correct that. Let me correct
they're
that.
probably not gonna change much, but,
The 666, 117, and it's actually 1.26859 is actual numbers. The projected numbers, the utility working capital fund doesn't change, 666, 117.
okay.
but she projects that the December balance of the general working capital fund will be 1.5. That was based on September and the decisions that were made by the board back in the summer timeframe.
Okay, thank you.
That's interesting. The October results shows 1.5 as utility capital fund, 666 as the general capital fund, like it's already been
Is that-
funded.
Is it working or is it? So this is where the reserve account funds and the working
They
capital
got-
funds, you gotta pay real close attention.
They
You
got the
could be right.
they get the non-utility capital reserves, but public utility reserves. Utility capital fund, general capital fund.
Okay, so that's the those are the latest numbers that she's funded them to that amount up to what, October?
Yep.
Okay.
So she's still holding projections in October?
Yeah.
Have you got that?
No.
Could you guys make sure that she's got that for the minutes to keep us
Yeah.
all informed? Because I haven't got it either.
That may be a discussion was had as to.
I think the real bottom line is that based on the board's direction, money has been set aside for the utility working capital fund and the general working capital fund. And set amounts exist in there, and Karina may be able to put a little bit more money into them by the end of the year.
But those are based on unfunded 2020, or unspent 2021 capital.
Okay, so where did,
Okay,
so you're asking a different question.
Yeah.
You're asking the question, where did the 666,117 and the $1.5 million come from?
Yes,
Okay? The PPP money that was set aside in case we didn't get forgiveness,
okay,
all right? When we found out that we were forgiven of that,
right.
that money that was set aside, some of it was spent on village high priority issues. Other parts of it were set in these funds.
Okay, and some went to the true reserve funds.
And
I
some
believe,
went to
but-
the true reserve funds.
But
Okay.
entirely different from the money that's sitting there because it was budgeted but not spent.
Yeah, that's
Entirely different.
Yes.
That's the carryover money.
So
That's
these
carryover
kind-
money.
yeah.
That's different money. That was not part of this equation.
And that's the big chunk.
Well, so the projection for, at the end of this year that Karina's carrying right now, the projection is that we will have 3.8 million in carryover, which means we either didn't execute certain things, the bills haven't come in, or we made more money on golf than we anticipated.
So it's
For
basically
example,
committed money.
and there are other examples, we
Yeah,
made more
other
money on
places, yeah.
X than we
Yeah.
anticipated.
But from the budget point of view, it's committed money that we have not spent. So it's
Some of it's
committed-
committed,
Yeah.
some of it's not committed. The committed money will be the money that is, we haven't got the bill for yet, okay? Some of it is uncommitted money, which is if we made more money on golf than we anticipated making, that is true just carryover money
Yeah.
to be spent however we wish to spend it in '22.
Yeah.
Okay?
Working
Or
from-
if we had, utility money, more money than we anticipated because there's more houses paying in than we anticipated. Yes, that's true.
So it's unspent, planned, and unplanned extra revenue.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think if you take that 3.8 million carryover, if memory serves, the last couple of monthly financial statements were showing that we were actually projecting about $1.4 million more revenue than we had reflected in the '21 budget, from a variety of sources.
Right. More lots had been bought, more
Yeah.
houses had, were being built, et cetera, so.
Yeah.
More fees.
Yeah, so of that carryover money, dangerous thing to do without numbers right in front of us, but of that 3.8 million, probably about 1.4 million of that 3.8 is well and truly money that was windfall, if you will. The remaining 2.4 is probably committed funds that either were not executed in '21 or were initiated in '21 and the final bills will not come due until '22.
So another way of putting that, again, to get it straight in here, which good luck, but there's roughly 2.4 in carryover and roughly 1.4 in excess revenue at present. Is that right?
Working from
Is that-
my very fallible memory, yes,
Okay.
but we'd have to check the financial statement, and see what it says this month, but.
I just wanted you to know I listened to what you said, but.
No,
But going back to the minimums then, it seems like the 666 and the 1.5 is our seed money.
yeah, I think you're right.
Would that,
I think that's our start money, yeah.
yeah, could we not define back to section 3, define section 3 as a minimum of, maybe round it up, 700,000 in working capital? I think you corrected that to the general capital and the 1.5, or is it 1.26? But,
1.5 is the
Okay.
projection.
Yeah,
but leave that as seed money for the,
well, so
Or is that-
here's where this gets hard. That's what it is this year. So what does it need, what's the minimum threshold that really has to be there to allow you to start 23 or 24 or 25? Because you could very easily expend additional capital funds on other things, and at the end of the year, you don't have, in the general capital fund, you wouldn't have $1.5 million left over. You'd have, if you decided to spend $500,000 more capital in '21 to do something, you'd have to have pretty good justification for it, but you could potentially draw that balance down below that threshold over the course of the year.
So you almost have to have some kind of description instead of a hard number.
Yeah. Yeah. So the hard part becomes, what do you
How
set
do
the
you describe
threshold
it?
at? And if you don't hit the threshold, is that grounds for panic, or is that just effective management?
well, that's why in terms of the seed, it seems to me, the projection of 3.8, 2.4 of that is carryover. So that has to be in this fund. The 1.4, I don't think goes into the working capital, doesn't it? That should go into general budget, I believe. So the minimums here for the current year would be the carryover, which would be 3.8 million, and then some amount, a minimum of which I think would be the 666 and the 1.5. We could define it as an amount like that, it seems, or make it a percentage of 2022 capital. I was thinking 10%, which would be 940,000, could make it 20 and up it, but, we're not talking about something that we need a huge thing in. It's just saying, hey, you can go talk to that guy about doing culverts. Or is that overly simplistic? In terms of a minimum definition, that seems simple to me.
So my suggestion on the minimum would be is that the next meeting where we can have Karina here, we ask Karina to tell us what the current numbers are, so we can actually have a piece of paper with numbers, and we can decide, is it a percent, is it
Yeah,
minimum, is
I
it
think
whatever?
it
Because
seems-
right now,
yeah.
there's too many assumptions of
It
what
sounds to
these
me like
are.
everyone here is agreed on the concept.
Yeah.
So now it's a matter of executing that concept, and I don't think we have enough information in front of us to do that.
Not today, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And this will actually be an interesting challenge, what those thresholds look like going forward is probably the greatest challenge we have right in this whole document.
Well, so this is my only other comment with regards to thresholds, all right? And if we have, let's just use the 666 and the 1.5. Let's just say that is that. So we know that if somebody wants to execute something over here in 22 at the beginning of the year, we have this money to get them going, all right? So this balance will start to go down because we're gonna expend it. The idea, right, is that we budgeted for that money, so there should be money coming in to replenish this back up to 666, right back to where it was.
Yep.
And when we get to the end of 22, we should be right back to 666 and
Yes.
1.5. We got things going earlier, because we were able to use this and then collect the money later.
Yes.
And now this balances back up. When we get to the end of 22, if there was a carryover, and if, I'm throwing a lot of ifs out here, but if there was a carryover and it's not spoken for, then you could put it in this, and now that money comes up here, which is good, because it means that in 23, ideally, you could do more starts at the beginning of the year, but at the same time, that would go down, but at the end of the year, it should be right back up to where it was, because we're supposed to collect all that money back on the backside. Back to the next year, there may be some carryover, maybe it's unallocated, you could bump that up a little bit, but each time you're bumping this up, you don't know what that carryover is on the backside, so you can't pick that number. So you're gonna go right back to 66 at
Really?
1.5.
Really, this kind of becomes part of, setting the target for this fund becomes part of the annual budgeting process, I think.
Yeah,
Because we can't decide today what we need for 24.
no,
And you may well,
It's
you
just
know,
part of the annual budgeting.
yeah, we've talked about doing the best we can to smooth the budgets. But some of the stuff that we've also talked about, some of these known unknowns, when they start to become reality, probably are gonna be budget spikes. You know, or at least they can be budget spikes if you plan for them properly, I'll put it that way.
yeah.
You know, it's like it's like in your home budget, you decide you're gonna, you know, you're gonna take a European cruise for a couple of weeks, and you know that's gonna cost you a lot of money. You know, well, if you plan for it, it's a planned budget spike, and it's not that big a deal. You know, but that only works out if you plan for it.
And all this is part of the conversation from last summer when problem solving was projected. The problem being expenses were growing each year and the revenue was not keeping up, so the adoption of the new assessment schedule, it was hoped that the revenue would cross the expenses within 2 years or 3, closer to 3.
Actually,
Between 2 and 3.
with what was approved, the budget and the revenue should be roughly equal to one another in '23.
So what Jeff was
With-
describing a while
Within the
ago-
error bound of the projections.
So what Jeff was describing a while ago is part of that conversation, that picture of the revenue increasing enough to cover these expenses.
With some planning.
Yeah, in '22, even with the assessment increase in '22, you still won't cover all of the money you would like to spend.
Right, but
In in '23, you ought to be pretty close, you know, plus or minus a
That's
couple of
the
percentage
reason-
points, one side or the other,
That was
of being
part-
able to cover the expenditures. Then you get to '24, then you've well and truly got, I don't want to use the phrase excess, but you've got more dollars available than
catch
you've
up.
got budgeted. So now you can start doing those investments to catch up on that deferred maintenance that hasn't been done over time.
I know I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but it seems to me we do have a funding mechanism for Section 3, though.
Yes.
It's
You
by
do.
definition of the carryover
Carryover.
funds plus the minimums of 666.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
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 We don't really need more information, it just won't be a number, it'll be a definition.
Yes.
Okay.
A little bit of a painful but a necessary conversation.
Absolutely.
But aren't we supposed to do the policy?
Yeah.
Do we want to go through Section 4? I don't know. I'd leave out the save for future needs, because that's not really part of the capital funds policy, is it? recognizes the need to adequately, again, you've done a great job with this is just comments.
No.
But
you're right.
adequately fund both current operations,
Mm-hmm.
or recognizes the duty to fund current operations and provide for the best opportunities for the current year, or something like that, rather than save for future needs. Because the working capital funds policy, I think it came out that way, wouldn't really be a savings account in any way, shape, or form. It's just a,
Yeah. No, this account feels more like, I would view this account, putting it in personal business terminology, this is my monthly checking account I pay the bills with. You know, where the savings account is more like the reserve funds and things like that.
reserved for capital stuff,
Yeah.
but for the most
Well,
part.
I think when you start talking about section 4, I think some of the things Jeff brought up earlier is where that really rolls in. You know, you've got, what you're really looking at is you're really looking at your 7-year O&M projections.
Yes,
And
that's the tie.
and the other part of that tie is, once you identify those known unknown items, or once you can at least put some reasonable time boxes around those known unknown items late in the day, then you start carrying those into the O&M table as well. You know, but the key factor there is you have to put them into the O&M table far enough in advance to be able to deal with that reality. And either, you know, if you walk in a large unexpected expense next year, well, okay, if that's gonna be the priority on the expenditures, then something's coming off the island in order to pay for it, you know, because you're only gonna have so much budget. So you have to recognize that if you've got a large, multi-million-dollar expenditure out there 3-4 years out, that you better start planning for it now.
Right.
Yep. And it sounds great to stand here and say that, actually writing it in words that make sense to somebody becomes a whole different problem.
I think it goes to your point though, Larry, it goes to, all right, so in using the 7-year OMT, we should be constantly looking for what's next on the horizon, what's the known unknown, do we have enough information to add it into the table? If we do, what are we doing to smooth flow that? Okay, and therefore, it can be accounted for with the working capital fund. If it can't be accounted for the working cap, within the constraints of the working capital fund amount, then now you have to turn to a discussion with the board and the staff on, all right, so what other mechanism are we gonna turn to? Is it that 1 million line of credit? Is it, we're gonna defer these actions, or what are we gonna do, right? But that's the planning factor that goes into this policy. By looking forward in that 7-year OMT, you're looking for what are your expenditures in the future, and are they gonna align with this fund going forward? If they're not, what decisions do we need to make?
Yeah, I would suggest that, I think this discussion has helped me better understand what this document needs to look like, and then rather than trying to make the sausage in the
Right
next
now.
15 minutes, I'd kind of propose that everybody can take a crack at editing.
Please
You know.
do. Please do.
I'd like to take a crack at editing, but I don't really want to do it on the fly with my pen.
No, I'm
My
with
desk
you.
with my
I'm
computer.
with you.
Yeah.
I'm trying to take notes to make sure that that when data comes in, understand where the cardinal heading is, but not this, wordsmithing by committee is just about the slowest process on the planet.
And then perhaps we'll have a draft everybody can be comfortable with that we can approve at the next meeting.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
this discussion has really helped me crystallize what I think we're trying to do.
yeah. And I would definitely encourage everybody, definitely encourage anybody who has any suggestions about how to structure any of these sections, please push them back to me, and I'll do my best to take all of that information and kind of do what I've done before, kind of smash it all together, and then we can send it out, give everybody something, a little bit more refined something to hate than this version, and then we can figure out where it goes from there. And if might take a couple of iterations for us to get it to where we want it to be. Okay, that's just human nature. Okay. So unless anybody has any other commentary here, I think I might want to bring this part of the dialogue to close. And I think the only other item on the agenda was meetings for the rest of the year. And I believe there's only 2 meetings on the calendar. One of them is in early December. Let me look at my calendar. Eventually it'll come up. I've got the 6th of December and the 2nd and 4th, 13th and 27th of December, my apologies. 13th of December seems achievable. 27th of December, you know, I would move that unless we have some urgent item that suddenly wanders in that we need to accommodate, we probably cancel the meeting on the 27th of December. And then we pick up again in 22, looks like the 10th of January.
10th of January.
So that would be my recommendation unless anybody has any objections, and I'll make sure to get that to Katrina, make sure she takes it off the calendar.
Okay. Good.
Everybody seems happy. And there's a couple folks in the audience before we move to adjourn. For those of you in the audience, anybody have any questions, any commentary, any feedback for us?
No, I'm Angela Berger, and I'm just.
Can you come to the microphone, sir? Otherwise you won't pick up in the
I'm
sound.
Angela Brinker, and I'm a new villager, and I'm just going to all the committee meetings, so I have an understanding of the leadership of the village.
Welcome to the
Well,
Thank you.
welcome, Angela, welcome to the
Thank you.
village.
Very welcome. You can see how much interest there is from most folks, so.
Your feedback's welcome.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. No other commentary? Motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.